My name is Cass Urban-Mead, and I'm a pollinator conservation biologist with the Xerces Society, which is an invertebrate conservation nonprofit. So we work to protect pollinators, beneficial insects, pest predators on farms, and also lots of other wonderful invertebrates like fireflies and mussels. And today we're working to help develop a pollinator plan with Chief Mann through this Community Gardens grant that was given to Munsee Three Sisters Farm by the NRCS.
Munsee, how are you? My name is Chief Vincent Mann. I'm the Turtle Clan Chief of the Ramapo Lenape Nation. Today we're doing a walkabout for a grant that we received for creating pollinator strips so that we can have better harvest and also to bring some of those bees back that are so important to what we do.
So I think today our big goal with this kind of first walkthrough, since we've known that we have the funds for all these pollinator plants, is to look at all these different areas and think about what it might look like to prepare the sites for the plantings, to start drafting up plant lists, and we'll send those back and forth and talk about which ones make sense, what's too tall, which ones support which pollinators. And start drawing out a map and getting the lists and maybe getting some seeds started as soon as we can for the winter. Yeah, we have a lot of different really cool goals I feel like we're trying to hit.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything from medicinal plants to regular pollinators to bushes, shrubs.
Yeah.
Try to help us with the issues that we have here on the farm too, which is areas that succumb to a lot of water,
right?
Which is a big issue. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about,
yeah.
When we go to create this area, are we going to do some kind of like strip the soil,
yeah,
put weed suppression down, and then bring that soil back?
I think that's one of the things we need to talk about today is like, I think we could do it a bunch of different ways. We could potentially do tarping. I'm seeing that you guys have some tarp, so that might be a strategy to just start suppressing that right away.
Right.
Tillage could be an option, especially on like the flatter areas, or we can talk about like what might be under here and how possible that would be with the equipment you've got. Yeah, we've been going back and forth on soil remediation because usually with, the really good pollinator plants are adapted to these soils and this climate. They actually don't need a lot of remediation usually.
Right.
But we'll look at the soil tests and go back and forth on whether that's another part of the step.
Yeah, because I know one of the things that we find is that when we do till the soil or plow it, that we're pulling up
all that weed seed.
Yeah. And some, in the back we actually have asparagus that turned up. That's been
great
dormant for a while.
Yeah.
But we clearly.
But usually we want to. Yeah, and I mean we do have till the spring. Normally, if we're starting from scratch from seed, then we think about a full season of silage tarping, usually with black heavy tarp, or repeated shallow cultivation to not bring up that deeper weed seed level. We have an advantage with this project, which is a big, really wonderful part of getting this grant, is that we can start from plugs and from shrubs directly, right? That was part of your guys' vision, was to not have to start from seed, which is wonderful, but just takes a lot more prep and time. And the plugs can kind of be like, aha, the garden is here, which gives us a little more flexibility with site prep too. So we could maybe, tarp this or mow it or just do 1 or 2 shallow tills in the spring and then mulch really heavily, especially if we know we have some weed-free soil amendment to bring in. I'm thinking out loud right now. This is the process we're going to be in.
So would it would be more advantageous for us to not have, so this is angled down, right, on the slope. Would it make sense to do like a tiered planting?
That's a cool idea.
More in a controlled thing if we took the natural soil that is here and mounded it up.
Good,
And then planted in those mounds and then come back with, chip it just to keep the majority of those weeds that are here down.
I think that's a really cool idea. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful option, especially if that feels like doable and exciting and would fit your vision, right? Like we could plant just straight into this hillside, but what you've
Right.
described would do a different type of
Right.
water management and slope management, and could be
Yeah,
really
I think
beautiful.
that it would be,
I love that.
given climate change, you know, and what we seen this past year with the amount of water that we have,
Yeah,
even our natural growing plants, you know, seemingly some have had issues.
absolutely. Yeah. And
So
last
that,
year's drought and this year's like
right,
extreme weather or extreme wetness. Yeah, it's really hard. Well, and like you mentioned a minute ago, so many of the pollinator plants, especially the ones that are woody, are providing the soil stabilization, the soil structure. They're providing water management. They're providing climate resilience. They're also medicinal. They're also edible.
which
So
is important
we're
for
trying
us
to do
here.
all of that at the same
Right,
time.
right. And
Yeah.
that's really important for us. You know, as Turtle Clan members and tribal members and friends come to the farm, you know, this, while it's a farm, right, it's really a place of healing, right?
Yeah.
Either in the end result of growing clean, healthy, natural grown, highly medicinal valued food, or, you know, the wild edibles that are around, or wild medicinals. And,
Yeah.
you know, that's part of our goal is to create those, you know, pockets of that, not just for, you know, for the Turtle Clan and the Ramapo Lenape Nation, but also for the other indigenous communities that are around, that we're also going to be working with.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a wonderful beginning, right?
All the pieces are interconnected. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, so earlier in the spring, in May, we actually had a corn planting ceremony where our relatives from Canada and out west joined us, where we planted in a spiral around uh, probably about 5 foot, 6 foot wide mounds that we created. Um, that corn really took off and did absolutely wonderful. As you can see, where this corn had a couple of things that went wrong. One of them was that we planted this corn probably 3 weeks after the other corn. But the other part of that was that even though the soil wasn't, even though it's clay-based, it's not clay-based in such where it's so compacted that the roots couldn't grow. I think that it was, you know, it had to do with the volume of water that we were getting. You know, there wasn't that, you know, we get wet, it dries out, it gets wet, we dry out. It wasn't like that, like we had in previous years. You know, last year was turned into be a drought year, but the year before that, it was that kind of a thing. It would rain, and it would be dry, and it would rain, and it would be dry, and it really set, you know, the growing season in a really good way. This year, end of May, after the corn planting ceremony, and just prior to it, we planted about 10, 15,000 plants. And all of those plants failed for us because of the pure volume of water, and the ground became so saturated that the water didn't vacate. That, even though what we can see here is that this is a high end, and then there's a dip in the middle, and then there's a high on the side, and then it dips on the other side. So this is a clear indication of the amount of water that was sitting in the middle there, that actually prevented that corn from establishing and growing the way that it should have. There are some small ears on here. You know, we're not sure what we'll do with those yet. It could just be a food crop for our relatives, the deer. The other corn in those mounds over there, which did really well, we'll be collecting that, drying it out, combining it with the other corn we have. So we have a couple of years of different seasons, and we'll be planting that in a 5-acre field in the back that has a tendency to be a little bit more level. And then we just lay down our tobacco and pray for a good growing season.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about how variable the weather has been, and with climate change, it just increases the importance of this type of regenerative farming and thinking about resilience in our food systems. And I think that's a big part of why we wanted to help develop the pollinator plan as part of that vision, because one of the really magical things about our pollinators is, often the European honeybee, which we manage in hives, jumps to mind first when people say pollinators. But, for me, as a pollinator biologist, I first loved honeybees and then learned that there's this amazing world of hundreds of native pollinators who evolved with the plants on this landscape. And there's over 350 species just in this kind of small area alone. And because they come in so many different shapes and sizes and they have different plant preferences, that actually creates pretty incredible buffer for pollination services to our food crops under different climate conditions. So, right, obviously, as just someone who thinks that the organisms are incredible and beautiful and we want to support them living in this land that they evolved in, so there's that magic of just having all of those species around us as part of this world that we love. And that also comes with this magical return resiliency that they provide, where when we plant a food plant or a medicinal crop, by having supported this really huge diversity of species and different types of groups of insects, we're more likely to have one who is ready to visit the right flower and to say, oh, I recognize this plant family in the nightshades. I know how to visit this type of flower. Or, oh, I'm good at visiting a legume flower. I know how pea flowers work, right? They don't think about it quite that way, but by having that huge buffer, we also have different species who will fly in colder weather or warmer weather. Who can handle different types of, some of them really, if they get soil inundated in the soil, they might have some losses, but others are nesting in the woods, in stumps and logs or in trees, and those may do better if other ones who are soil nesting maybe had a harder year. So just that diversity creates that kind of resiliency that we all rely on, so it's magic.
Well, true, and I think that by us also, putting, the seeds of our ancestors back into the soil, right? That also is helping to regenerate, those bees that were, back then, right?
Absolutely.
Because like so many different species, they get lost along the way because those things have been stripped away.
Yeah.
So when we think about, our ancestral corn or ancestral squash or ancestral beans and the gathering, of nut trees and fruit trees that our ancestors would, take from quite a ways away, like persimmon, right? So our ancestors would travel and, they would be down in Virginia or Delaware, around that area, and bring those fruits back and then take those seeds and plant them.
Yeah.
There are some areas here in northern New Jersey where those trees have been able to thrive.
Absolutely.
All the way from back there in that time. So even though this is only a 14-acre parcel of land, this little 14-acre parcel of land, for all intents and purposes, is our world. And if we have the ability to bring back, not just the indigenous people, right? Not just the indigenous plants, but all the indigenous species.
The whole cycle. Yeah.
Right. And, for us, we look at that kind of world as something that is, relying upon that next species, right? We don't think of ourselves as indigenous people as the ones who control nature, right? We know that we have to continue to evolve and to continue to do what all of our ancestors have done, right? Which is adapt to an ever-changing climate, whether humans have something to do with it, or it's a impounded or compounded by a cyclic change as well.
Sure.
So our hope is that we can create that here, and then we'd have the ability to kind of bring this to other indigenous communities throughout the United States and Canada, but as well as non-indigenous people who are like-minded.